ETM Hotel, Rennie Sean, welcome in peace. My name is Sean. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning into part 4 of the Legacy of Queen Nzinga. Please like the show, share the show, tell a friend that we're actually live. Hold on 1 second before we get going. There we go. That we're actually live. All right, I had to make sure I could see what's going on. All right, so again, this is part 4 of the Legacy of Queen Nzinga. And as always, we are here to provide historical context on her legacy and her life as it was attacked by Eurocentric, how do I want to frame this? Eurocentric gossipers, right? Who made accusations and claims about her legacy and her life and charges without providing any type of context, any type of real historical perspective in regard to her life. It was said a few days ago that she sold slaves for 40 years in a chat by the barber. But we're gonna in order to deal with the claims, right? In order to deal with people's claims about historical facts or historical evidence or science, just anything in general, all the sciences in general, you first have to do your literature reviews, and in your literature reviews you have to make sure that you know your author, know if they're writing in the times, what evidence are they using to support their information, are they using primary sources to yield their conclusions or writing about their findings, is the summaries warranted, did they miss something, could we add something? You have to do all of those things. So when you're providing people information, you want to make sure that it's the most accurate information as possible. For one of the reasons, because that in itself is the right thing to do. You can't be lazy with stuff like that. I don't want to get into the emotionalisms, all they called her B's and H's, or Nazis, Hitler, Queen Elizabeth. I don't want to get into that because that's not scholarship at that point. That's why I said it's gossip. It's gossip at that point. It has nothing to do with the legacy. It's gossip. And then it's your belief. So you want other people to believe how you believe, because you have now convinced yourself to be emotionally attached to an idea, a thought. And after you lay down the historical context, then you can chew up the claims. But yeah, come on in, man. Like the show, share the show, man. Tell a friend. We in the building. I do want to say peace to everybody in the chat. Peace to everybody who will catch the replay. I have noticed that people, they have been watching the videos, but I just get messages, I guess, that people don't leave them in the comment section. But this is part 4. Hopefully you have been riding along with us through part 1 through 3. And I'm going to go ahead and break this thing down. So we ended with Nzinga's brother ruling, going through his trials and tribulations as his father did, as his grandfather did, resisting the Portuguese and trying to be diplomatic in his endeavors to restore Ndango's kingdom. He didn't have much success, but he sacrificed his sisters in a way to give them some type of um, political power, especially in Nzinga, to go and negotiate on his behalf. And he made her a one of a kind delegator, pretty much. And he said, if at all costs, well, if you can see your way of getting things done through baptism, then you have the choice or the right to do so. That is your choice. So she did that in good faith, assuming that it would bring better negotiation powers before them so that they can handle their business. But that didn't actually transpire. However, the Portuguese really was shunning them, and they tended to look at them from a different direction. So now the brother is in some deep waters. He's losing ground. His enemies, the Mbangala, who they call cannibals, they're raiding and they're doing certain things. They are still enslaved. They're slave raiding for the Portuguese. This is prime 16. What is it? 1620s? Yeah. So it's the early 1620s, and the slave ratings and slave trading, poppings and things of that nature is cracking. And all the money is coming through the Portuguese. They have a monopoly on the slave trade, and the Dutch want in, the British want in, the Spaniards want in, other European nations want in, and we haven't even got that far yet. So right now we're we're at the point of Portuguese's golden era in the slave trade. All their wealth is coming from bodies. They also control all the natural resources in Angola. They have positioned themselves in a manner to, if there's salt there, they got it. Rubber, they got it. If there's gold in the area, they dang sure got it. They have cornered the market. The Africans have nothing else but bodies to if they want to get in on any type of economic gain for their kingdoms or for their power and presence in the areas. It is with bodies. And those bodies are not your people. Those are bodies from outside of your nationhood, your kingdom, your area. These are other tribes. These are other people that are not like you, captured in war, ratings and expeditions and things like that. However, so that's where we are. And then at the end, he meets his fate. He no longer has the will and the skill power to facilitate things. And just like his father, he begins to grow weary, and he also begins to find that his loss of support really wasn't a good thing, but he's trying to do all that he could. But he goes out, and they say that his sister helped him out on his way with some type of drink, possibly, or someone poisoned him, and he went out that way. But he goes out that way, and Nzinga steps up. Now remember, the brother killed it. All right, so let me clear this up real quick, and I'm gonna say this for everyone listening. So they were talking about if the if the Ndongo was either matrilineal or patrilineal, and it was said that they were patrilineal, and they said the lineage goes through the mother. Well, if that's true, the last king, right? Well, let's King Kansi, right? If he had a daughter, then how would his son assume kinship? Okay. And then Ndongo uh Kissy's son Mbandi, so I'm saying Angola Mbandi, I said Ndongo. So Mbandi, when he assumes it, he has three sisters. Only one of them has a child. This child is too young to actually rule, but they have a child. That person with the child was Nzinga. Nzinga child was killed by her brother. For him to rightfully stake claim to the kinship, it was a political move by him for him to claim the rights over the kingdom. So we can't leave that out. So you know what I'm saying? Even if you go back into the great grandfather, remember the great grandfather somehow usurps. They really don't get too specific, but he usurps. When I say grandfather, her grandfather, I should just leave it like that, usurps some kind of way, and things happen in that manner. So just to give some clarity to certain things, and Zinga's son would have been would have had the rights to the kingdom, and her brother would have not been the king. So just so people are not confused, and we just wanted to give that. Please make sure that you liking the show and share the show. All right, so we ended with Nzinga taking ownership. She would continue to, try to figure out a way to deal with the Portuguese. Her jobs in 1663. She wanted to work to reassert Ndongo hegemony, and she still wanted to limit the Portuguese power in the region. She had her own goals and aspirations. Um, and this is where we were at in all of this. So they called her a defiant queen. Even before the death of her brother, Mbandi, in the spring of 1624, Nzinga had positioned herself to take over the leadership of Ndongo and govern it in a way that recalled the country of her youth. Remember, when she was 10, she remembers the country of her youth. It was prosperous at that time, and her grandfather was resisting the hell out of the Portuguese. Her grandfather and father, Casinda and Mbandi and Angola, respectively had control over a vast territory that covered a large portion of modern-day northern Angola, garnering respect from and instilling fear in their enemies and followers alike during the majority of their reigns. Their armies were powerful and massive. The two kings fielded hundreds of thousands of troops, but they also sought diplomatic relations with the Portuguese and neighboring allies when warranted. Their personal wealth came in part from the tribute sent to the court by numerous subordinate rulers across Ndongo, as well as from income earned through the labor of hundreds of thousands of serfs and slaves who farmed state lands. Casinda and Mbandi Angola supplemented this income with taxes they imposed on local markets in which their agents operated, trading for slaves and other goods. In addition, they control access to the routes to markets in regions east and Ndongo, beyond their territorial borders. Riches aside, much of Casinda Mbandi Angola position derived from a unique spiritual status Ndongo leaders were believed to possess. Remember, this 1624, we're going backwards, we're walking backwards to go forward. Nzinga's grandfather and father held fast to Mbandu traditions despite the inroads of Christianity had made in pockets of Ndongo's population. The Ngangas conducted ritual services throughout the kingdom, reinforcing the leadership status. And Nzinga's aspired to recreate the Ndongo of her childhood should come as no surprise. But after Mbandi's death, she seemed to dream of surpassing political and spiritual achievements of her predecessors. Now, Nzinga stood out from the moment of her birth in 1582. According to stories that she and her and others furnished in later years to the neighbors, biographers such as Giovanni Antonio Cavazzi and Antonio Gaeta, both of whom lived in a court surrounded by Ndongo priests and other attendants. She was born in position we today call breech, her face upturned, and further, her umbilical cord was wrapped firmly around her neck. And Bandu beliefs held that a baby born in this so-called unnatural manner and not live a normal life, and that the manner of the person's birth predicted the character of the adult. Her father alluded to her unusual birth, named his daughter Nzinga from the Kimbandu root Kujinga, which means to twist, to turn, to wrap. Those present at her birth dutifully performed the many designated rituals pertaining to the childbirth. Among them, as you will see a custom across the continent of Africa, washing the baby in the herbal solutions they believed were necessary to protect her. We see this throughout African tradition. When a baby is born, they are washed in the herbs. As the story goes, the onlookers stared at the newborn in amazement and wonder and contemplating the life she was destined to lead, sighed, Mama O Aya, or Oh My Mother. Kavazi explained that this was the usual expression of the astonishment when remarkable events happen. He interpreted its meaning as what an example of ferocity this child would be. In any event, even when Nzinga was in her 70s, her people still sang many songs in her honor, one of which had the refrain, Oh, my mother, oh, oh. During her childhood, say her chroniclers, if you don't know what a chronicler is, these are people that are writing at the time of the event. You see Portuguese chroniclers, you see Arab chroniclers, you see other European chroniclers, and so forth. During her childhood, say her chroniclers, Nzinga exhibited an intellectual and physical prowess that distinguished her from other young people at court, including her own brother, and she forged a unique relationship with her father that continued into her young adulthood. Her close relationship with her father seems to have been unusual for a girl, or for that matter, she was a girl dad. What he was a yeah, you know what I'm saying. For any child or ruler, rulers ran the risk of alienating relatives of the principal wife of concubines if favored, in particular spring. And Bandi Angola, however, flouted convention, openly preferring his daughter of his favorite concubines over his other children. It was widely believed that Nzinga had received a special blessing, and this enhanced her standing at the court. Now, traditions passed all the way down to the present portray Nzinga as doubly privileged because she had inherited royal status through her mother. Member of Mbandu royal lineage, the Mbadus are matrilineal, and she was also the daughter of a reigning king. What was Nzinga's early life in court like? We know that Nzinga's childhood was marked by repeated attacks from both external and internal enemies, by constant disruptions caused by campaigns that we fought around Kabasa. Now, we know of this to be true because at 10, she was on the move when her grandfather was reigning. He dies around her 10th birthday. Her father assumes the position as king of Ndongo. They are fleeing from place to place as well. So, absolutely, in her childhood, it was full of disruption. No family, royal or otherwise, was unaffected See, this is the perspective. If all you seen was chaos and war and fleeing and running and hiding and then protecting and fighting and resisting, this is what you're accustomed to. All men were expected to serve as soldiers, and all the women was expected to contribute food and labor to the war effort. In fact, in the year of Nzinga's birth, her grandfather Kacinda faced 3 successive, devastating campaigns by Portuguese forces. In January the following year, before Nzinga's first birthday, her grandfather and the rest of the court were forced to flee Cabasa after hearing the sounds of Portuguese guns fired in their direction at the capital. We know much about the many battles that went on during Nzinga's first decade of life, but we can only imagine the impact of this unrelenting violence and tremendous loss of life would have had on a young girl, whether or not she hoped to prove that she warranted special attention from her father throughout her childhood and into her adulthood. And Nzinga eagerly learned the political, military, and ritual activities generally reserved for the one's sons rulers. She was allowed to attend the numerous judicial, military, and councils over which her father presided, in which she learned from the venerable older women who served as her nurses and caretakers. Contemporaries noted that throughout her life, she was fastidious about respecting and observing the laws, rights, customs of her ancestors. Nzinga was also renowned for outshining her brother. Y'all remember that? Outshining her brother and other children in Angola's household in her skill with battle axe and the royal symbol of Ndonga people. She boasted about her expertise even in her 70s, and her biographer, Gaeta, wrote that he was impressed with her knowledge of art or of military dancing and her ability to wield an axe. Now, despite her military expertise as a young woman, Nzinga did not neglect her appearance and her place as a privileged woman in the court. A painting by Cavazzi depicted her as a woman of the 40 in the audience with Portuguese governor J.O. Corrado de Sousa in 1622 provides the only evidence we have of what she might have looked like. And that's that picture that you see that's often by her where she's sitting at that little royal place sometimes, or that little image of with a crown on her head. While it is likely that Nzinga's gender influenced her decision to become such a great diligent student of ritual, she made clear that her actions, that her gender did not preclude her from enjoying the same liberties as her male counterparts. In addition to having her service at a hotel or female attendants and slaves, she kept a large number of young male concubines, and she is reported to have multiple lovers throughout her life. Although none of them became her principal husband, when she was younger, she led an active sexual life. Cavazzi reported that even as a septuagenarian, Nzinga, like other Mbandus who followed the tradition, had 9 or 10 cuts on her arm that were still visible and had been made by her many lovers. The son that her brother murdered or had murdered only a few days after his birth was likely fathered by one of those lovers. Some members of the court apparently did not think that it was appropriate for Anzinga to carry on in the same way as a man. However, according to Cavazzi, a male functionary who was scandalized by Nzinga's many amorous affairs, pointed out to her that her behavior brought disrespect upon father's court. He paid dearly for the crime of offering unsolicited advice to the superior. And Nzinga had the outspoken manson murdered before his eyes. Then she had him murdered as well. Like her royal ancestors, Nzinga followed the traditions of demanding absolute difference from subordinates. At some point as a young adult, Nzinga became a leader in the war effort. Unlike other women who accompanied the army into action, Nzinga seemed to have played some role in mobilizing resistance against the Portuguese. It is difficult to reconstruct Nzinga's military career before 1624, when she became the ruler of Ndongo. The first reference of her participation in military action comes from Antonio Cardanaga's History of Angola. That's your source. In his discussion of the campaign in 1602-03, in which the Portuguese sent troops to suppress rebellions of Sobas in the province of Ilamba, he noted that the rebels had responded to the voice of the queen, their lady, who always worked to build up those whom we had conquered, hatred and courage in them to make movements and alterations. And Nzinga would have been 19 or 20 years old at that time. And although there are no details recounting her battlefield experience, she could only have been effective if she herself had been actively engaged in the fighting. She appears for the second time in a military record of battle in the province of Musiki, in which Cardane describes a confederation of Nzinga support joining her in a struggle against the Portuguese after they had succeeded in conquering much of Ndango. Carnego also pointed out that during the last 2 years of her father's reign in several Portuguese campaigns carried out from Kasama to Masagano, the people found ways to resist the colonial power, induced and ordered by the cunning queen, our capital enemy who never tires of looking for ways to ruin us. And Nzinga probably gained her most extensive military experience during the disastrous wars her brother fought against João Mendes Vasconcelos, the son of Governor Luis Vasconcelos. Perhaps lacking faith in Mbandi's ability to win the war against the Portuguese, Nzinga had left the court to live in another part of the kingdom, most likely in the eastern Ndongo near Mataba. From her remote headquarters, she seems to have led her own troops against the young Mendes in a campaign against eastern Ndongo and Mataba. For many months, Carnega wrote that Jao was unable to share any news of his progress with his father in Luanda because Queen of Angola, Njinga, had blocked the route, preventing all communications. She also appears to have fought alongside two Mbangala leaders in 1620 after they broke with the Portuguese. For Kandaga tells a story that the troops fought great battles against Nzinga and the Mbangala. Now, according to Kavazi, she referred later in life to a military experience she had had before she became queen. She recalled that while she was in Luanda and her brother's envoy, even though she was accustomed to battles, she had been both dazzled and intimidated by the display of military gunfire and the display exercise the Portuguese army performed as a part of her welcome. After returning from Kabasa, she went back to the battlefield immediately. In fact, increasingly disappointed with her brother's running of the war, Nzinga began to consolidate her own base of support among the Ndongo troops. Now, it was around this time she also encouraged some Sabas to join her. Nzinga's role of resistance against the Portuguese was a popularity she gained among important segments of Ndongo's population. It proved invaluable after her brother's death. In addition to her honoring skills and military leader, Nzinga capitalized on other opportunities during the disastrous years of Mbando's short reign to promote herself as a viable alternative to her brother. It is possible to know whether Nzinga took great umbrage at the request itself of the fact that the letter's format defied the Keti, but one thing she made clear, had she been ruler, she would have handled the situation much differently than her brother. Now, she insulted her brother's masculinity at times. If he could act neither as a king nor as a man, Nzinga needed, he should retire to a small farm and work for himself. She hurled these and other type of words at her brother because, there's still some hatred. Not too much so that they couldn't work together, but the fact that he killed her child. So now she ain't got no kind words. But she held in check in order to serve her people. Now, as Mbandi contemplated his decision to make peace with the Portuguese by agreeing to a public baptism, his sister Mercy, she taunted take his toll. She basically taunted him, told him not to anyway. Y'all know it, y'all heard her. She kept telling the man to not get baptized. It was a trick, it was a plot. It was widely believed that Mbandi's depression at the end of his life was brought on by his sister and her actions and her constant undermining his authority. Now, before I go any further, I am I see I am joined by Brother Sutek and Brother Kofi in the chat. I don't want to get too far ahead. And Clumsy Chemist, you trying to get too far ahead too. We ain't nowhere near the conversations with the Dutch yet. Uh, we on par four, but go ahead, Sutek, what you got for me?
Nah, man, you breaking it down. You adding a lot of context. I see or I hear a lot of things said that contradict some of the things that other people are saying. So you going in, bro.
Yeah, I know if Kofi is by his mic, he'll have his camera on because he want to show his Ramesses fade. You know what I'm saying? But being that he ain't by a microphone, or he might have got up and went to go get a fish sandwich and fries. You know what I'm saying? I'ma just continue. So Nzinga's gender, her regale bearing, and her pride in Mbondu traditions all coalesced to make her a political force even before she took over the kingdom. She headed the delegation in Luanda in 1622 to negotiate, remember, to represent her brother, and that was her opportunity to do so. Um, So what we're going to do is look a little bit deeper into that, and we're going to deal with a number of eyewitness and chronicles to paint the picture of Nzinga on the threshold of her reign. I'm going to say that again. So what we're going to do is look a little bit deeper into Nzinga. We're going to deal with eyewitness accounts and chronicler accounts that paint the picture of Nzinga on the threshold of her reign. From the moment she received her assignment from Mbandi, Nzinga seized the opportunity to contrast herself with him. The king, at her request, provided her with a large entourage to accompany her on a 200-mile journey from Kabasa to Luanda. Mbandus living in the region of Ndangas, the Nzinga entourage passed through, would have seen or heard of an arresting scene. A large number of attendants of both sexes catering to Nzinga. She had strong male slaves carrying the Lady Angola on their shoulders. Other slaves transporting the numerous of gifts Nzinga had insisted on bringing to meet the officials. Her consummate performance, however, was in the negotiation room with the governor and his advisors, where her royal demeanor and legal arguments would become legendary. While in Luanda, Nzinga refused to wear Portuguese clothes, instead strategically choosing to highlight in Bandu fashion. She knew that the Portuguese would defer to royal deportment and etiquette, and she made a vivid impression on the officials when she appeared majestically in the doorway. During the meeting, Nzinga wore numerous cloths, and her arms and legs were covered with priceless jewels. Moreover, Nzinga wore in her hair colored feathers. Nzinga's ladies in waiting and female slaves dressed in similar manner. Later in life, when she had access to European imports, Nzinga expanded her wardrobe to include silk drapes, velvets, brocades, and a variety of scents and perfumes that she used to enhance her appearance even into the 60s and 70s. And Nzinga dramatic interest trained the spotlight entirely on her.
She was masculine though.
Right.
That
They
don't
called her
sound
masculine. Yeah. Wearing silk and all of that. Nah, that don't sound masculine at all.
perfumes and
Perfumes. What masculine person wears perfumes? But she was what though?
she was masculine.
She was
Wearing
masculine.
perfumes and drapes and silk and I don't know what their definition is.
Well, no, you can't get a definition. It's just barbershop talk. Now, um, she is very political, and she is very aware of her the economic issues that she had come to undertake with the Portuguese in power. But the performance did not end there, and Nzinga knew the Portuguese officials had a way to humiliate defeated Mbandu leaders. So while the governor sat at a chair covered with a velvet embroidered with gold. Servants would arrange seating for Mbandu visitors by spreading velvet covers on the floor. Now remember, we already talked about this image. They intentionally lay down the velvet covers on the floor because this is the way that they wanted to arrange the seatings on behalf of the people, the Mbandu. So the arrangement forced those having an audience with the governor to display their subordinate status, a status Portuguese reserved for conquered Africans. Nzinga, however, refused to lower herself. Without pause, she signaled haughtily to a female attendant, who immediately dropped to all fours and assumed the position of a human chair. She remained that way throughout the long hours of the discussion. Upon escorting Nzinga from negotiation room, the governor Sosa pointed out that the young attendant was still on her hands and knees on the floor. Nzinga dismissed the governor's concern. She had not gotten the attendant at all, she explained. She had left her there deliberately. An envoy of her status who represented a kingdom such as hers should never have to sit on the same chair twice. After all, she remarked, she had many others just like her. Indeed, Nzinga not only achieved the political ends that her brother expected, but also gained some political leverage for herself. At her departure, the governor promised privately that the Portuguese would remain mutual friendships with the region of Mataba, where Nzinga had consolidated her own power. Nzinga later expressed appreciation for the gracious way the Portuguese treated her in Luanda. She recalled a banquet governor held in the honor of occasion of festivities and guided and splendor. She had made herself available to all the high status officials in Luanda who called on her, exchanged gifts and visitors. She exhibited profound interest and engagement in the hostess, Ana da Silva, wife of the judge, and others. Later, Nzinga confessed that during those months in Luanda, she experienced a profound happiness and extraordinary peace. So they treated her with respect all the way around. Nzinga's skillful negotiations ensured delegation success. However, it was a combination of defiant display of pride and traditions of the culture of Ndongo, her adroit use of her gender, and her political sagacity that laid the foundation for her later career of Mbandu nationalist. She had dreamed of this day. She could avenge herself and her sisters and her cruel brothers' mistreatment. She had now been able to do so in a very public stage where she represented herself and him. Her success in Luanda drastically, well, I wouldn't say drastically, but I would say contrast dramatically with her brother's ineffective leadership. Remember, he couldn't make any way with these people, but she was able to. Nzinga had made it clear to the Portuguese and the Mbandus alike that she would use both gender and the power that came to her royal status to take charge over Ndongo politics. And this will lead the kingdom back to their greatness, and her brother had failed them so far. Now, I know you heard me say something about consolidating power earlier, so we're going to get into that. Following return to Luanda, Nzinga had essentially become a de facto leader in Ndongo. Depends on who's telling it. Indeed, Mbandi had already indicated that she should rule after his death, leaving the little that they had to her. Remember, they done took everything from her, so she ain't got much. Nzinga had to consolidate her position as ruler, however, as soon after her brother died. She had partisans at the court in the Kingdom Island and Kwanzaa River confirm her as the ruler by the customary election. At the time she took possession of all the ritual objects and symbols associated with Ndongo royalty, an essential act that validated her power. Some of the details of the transcription period are uncertain, and Nzinga may have traveled from one of the islands called Danji to the court of Kabasa. What is now known wasn't known in 1625. She had enlarged her court at Danji and brought more people from Kabasa and other regions to occupy several of the island, some of which she fortified. One chronicler noted the island had become the pride of Kwanzaa River within a very short time. It is unclear whether Nzinga received the title Queen of Angola, which is Angola Kalanji at this time, as Cavazi wrote. Remember, Cavazi's writings are still available, based on interviews with Nzinga and her courtiers several decades later, or rather, the electors only address her as Lady of Angola. As newly appointed Portuguese governor Fernão de Sousa reported in his letter that was written on August 15, 1624, a few months after her nomination. Whatever her official title is at the time, Nzinga may also have had her chief male concubine, Kia Ituxi, given the title of king. Once elected, Nzinga had to consolidate control. She led her partisans in the campaign to eliminate anyone in the court who refused to accept her as ruler. Peace out. Her brother had earlier turned over her 7-year-old nephew, his son, the legitimate inheritor to the throne, to the Mangala Casa for safekeeping and training as a soldier. And a major goal of Nzinga's campaign was to get the child back. At the time, Casa Colombo war camp was in the region of Kina, not too far from Nzinga's base. By 1625 in September, Nzinga had gotten rid of her concubine and approached Casa. She reportedly used her wills and her wealth to persuade him that she was passionately in love with him, displaying her affection in public and showering him with gifts. At first, Casa resisted, disturbed that Nzinga was older than he was, and convinced that she wanted to marry him only to get her hands on the boy. Eventually, however, he agreed to a union and to surrender the boy. The wedding was held somewhere not in Kendongo Islands, but further inland in the vicinity of Mataba. This is where Nzinga's headquarters was, one of them. Her nephew accompanied Casa to the site. The ceremony wasn't even over before Nzinga seized the little boy, murdered him, and threw his body in the Kwanzaa River and declared that she had revenged her son. Nzinga also killed many of her other relatives who were in attendance. Although her actions led some of her supporters to flee, many of Mbandu people stayed loyal. They regarded Nzinga as the legitimate ruler of Ndongo, and her murderous acts did not change their views. So let's take it back a little bit. Remember what happened when Mbandi took control of the kinship? What was the first thing that Mbandi did? Mbandi started wreaking havoc on the Ndongo people. He wasted no time on humiliating and killing people. They're not going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. So the brother came in and wrecked shop, ran off people, killed people, murdered people. He did a similar thing, but in a different context. He did this in a way that he could seize power. He killed a child. He killed all them political leaders around the area. This for him to seize power. So only right in return, she does the same behavior, but with less deaths. The next step in Nzinga's plan was to return to Kabasa to reoccupy the traditional capital and reassert royal rule over the parts of the Ndonga that the Portuguese under Luis Mendes Vasconcelos had taken over during her brother's reign. Throughout this period of consolidating her position, Nzinga sent frequent emissaries with letters to the governor. And this is why you get those writings that Dr. Heywood talk about in the Portuguese writings, along with their chroniclers and other primary sources that's held in Portugal. As a seeking resolution to the situation of Portuguese authority. In August 1624, she reminded him of an agreement that they had, especially with her brother Mbandi, that once the Portuguese removed the fort from Mbaka and returned the Quijacos and the Sobas taken from Ndongo by Mendes Vasconcelos, she would immediately leave the island and return to Kabasa. Under the terms of the agreement, she would then reopen the markets in Kassala, where they had been traditionally located. Her own people would go to the markets with slaves, a condition in which she and her counselors had already agreed, and the people would begin to farm again. And Nzinga also spelled out details concerning the role of Jesuit missionaries would play in Ndongo. And Nzinga's version of events jibbed with the official documentation that De Sousa examined. His predecessors had concluded that the wars waged by Vasolis against Ndongo had been unjust. They had recommended that the fort of Mbaka be moved and the Kajacos returned. But De Sousa advised the Portuguese king that finalizing the resolution with Nzinga would be beneficial not only to Angola but to the coffer of the king. Having the roads and the markets reopened, De Sousa wrote, would be very important to the treasury of your majesty as well as the kingdom which lacks slaves. So the kingdom didn't have no slaves. They lacked them. Said the governor himself in the first official report to the king of the status of the colony has described Angola of being a miserable state. But De Sousa had no intention on allowing Ndongo to be rebuilt under the leadership of an ambitious Mbandu woman. And like his predecessors, he refused to honor the terms of the agreement to the letter. He demanded that Nzinga return the Portuguese, the Cambares, the Mbandu soldiers serving under the Portuguese officers, and the slaves who had fled to join her before he could make any decision about the Kinjoka's return. He also demanded that she become a vassal of the Portuguese king in her own name and in the name of all her successors to the Ndongo kingdom and pay a small tribute. So he didn't want to honor the agreement. He wanted total control over what was to happen, and he dang sure didn't want her reestablishing a kingdom. He didn't want to give nobody no power over there because that would lead to war. By the early fall of 1624, Nzinga received the Sousa response. The economic and political situation around Luanda had deteriorated, and at least some of the terms of the agreement had been violated already. Nzinga knew the governor had sent Portuguese officials to Ndongo and neighboring areas to reopen the slave markets and provision centers that new officials had been appointed to oversee them, something she had intended to do herself with her own people. Furthermore, these officials were attempting to recruit Sobas to the Portuguese cause by offerings to remain peaceful terms with them and encouraging them to become allies. By July 1626, De Sousa recorded that in addition to the 109 Sobas who were already vassals of the Portuguese king, he had added another 83 more. The Portuguese wanted those slave markets back open. She was controlling them and kept them on lock. She wasn't into trading. Remember, they said she spent 40 years trading. The markets is shut down. She was going to reopen them to honor the Portuguese, to honor the little deal with the Portuguese, because that would bring her wealth. That would bring her kingdom wealth, and she could restore her kingdom. Her whole thing was about restoring the kingdom that she once knew as a child. Each of the Sobas participated either willingly or by force in degrading ceremony of the vassalage called undamento. Every aspect of undamento was designed to strip the Soba of his dignity. The Soba would appear at the fort to stand humbly before the governor or another official, who explained to him his duties and obligations as a vassal to the king. Payment of tribute of the slaves and provisions, not only from him and descendants, but from his counselors as well. Immediately thereafter, the official threw flour over the Soba's hands and shoulders. Then, to signify his new status, the Soba fell to the ground in front of the official and agreed to the obligations and would pass from him to his descendants. The Soba's name was inscribed in a book, and at the end of the ceremony, he placed his mark to the next to it. From beginning to the end, it was a humiliating spectacle, and many of the Sobas who underwent the ceremony never understood that they had agreed to pay tribute in perpetuity. By pressing provincial leaders to become vassals, the Portuguese wittingly bolstered Nzinga's support. She became emboldened as an increasing number of Mbandus refused to pay tribute and looked to her for leadership. She refused to comply to De Sousa's demand that herself pay tribute. She did not consider herself a vassal of the Portuguese king. By December 1624, a large number of slaves owned by Portuguese, as well as many Sobas, had become vassals, had fled the Portuguese area and joined Nzinga's rank. Through her many officials who traveled between the Kendongo Islands and Luanda, Nzinga kept in direct contact with both the Portuguese officials and the Mbandu people. In Luanda, for example, one of her outspoken informed the governor that she could not return the slaves who had fled to her because she had none, she claimed. So the slaves the Portuguese got that fled from the Portuguese reconnects with Nzinga. The Portuguese said, "Hey, I need my people back." And she said, I ain't got your people. I don't know what you're talking about. That's a strong move right there because that gives those people that fled hope. They look to who? Nzinga for leadership. And the moves that she made and was making was totally against that of the Portuguese. So through her many officials who traveled between the Kingdom Islands of Luanda, Nzinga kept in direct contact, like I said, with her people. She told them what she needed to tell them. She refused to agree with De Souza. So De Souza dispatched his representatives to send messages to Nzinga, warning her that if she failed to return the Cambares and slaves now aligned with her army, he would end all the contact with her and she could not send any more messages. To reach the larger Mbandu population living in the Portuguese control area, Nzinga employed her messengers to deliver a message at odds with the Portuguese demands. In the vicinity of the Portuguese farms and forts, these Mankanzus relayed Nzinga's instructions to the slaves and Incumbaros who were still fighting on the side of the Portuguese, urging them to abandon the Portuguese and join her cause. Her network was extremely effective and instigated many large-scale slave fights during the early months of 1625. Whole villages fled Portuguese farms and contingents of Mbandu Cabaras absented from their ranks. In a later date of March 9, 1625, De Souza expressed concern over the state of affairs and advised the King of Portugal that Nzinga was persuading more and more Mbandus to leave the Portuguese and join her cause, from promising that she would give them the land they could till and live in, and that they were better off being masters of their own native land than our captives. Nzinga had impressed the Mbandu people in ways Mbandi couldn't. In 1622, performance in Luanda was no doubt still alive in their minds, whether they had seen her themselves or merely heard a story about her. The Mbandu masses rallied around Nzinga's cause, which she had expressed so passionately in her negotiations 3 years earlier. By the beginning of the summer in 1625, Nzinga recruited more people. De Souza's emissaries could persuade her to hand over the slaves who had joined her. He couldn't. Now, instead, Nzinga simply continued to claim that she had been misunderstood and that she had no such slaves. See, to her, those were her people. These people that were fleeing the Portuguese and joining her was her people. They were a part of the Mbandu. They were the Mbandu people. So who is the slaves? I don't know no slaves. I'm sorry, Portugal, but I don't know who you talking about. You keep saying I got slaves. I don't have no slaves. What you talking about, bruh? Nzinga's position in 1625 represented a turning point in Ndongo-Portuguese relationships. See, from 1575 to 1624, the Portuguese had maintained the upper hand in their relations with the Ndongo. During the 50 years since Dias Novas began the conquest of Ndongo, the Portuguese, with the help of Mbangala allies, had conquered or claimed lands whose rulers had formerly sent tribute to Ndongo kings. Additionally, the Portuguese-led armies had killed or co-opted thousands of local officials and turned hundreds of thousands of free villagers and other dependent groups into outright slaves. They didn't turn them into slaves. The Portuguese turned them into slaves. Now, either forced to work on Portuguese owned plantations or sold in the Atlantic slave trade. So the Portuguese, I want to slow this down for everybody again. She's telling these people, look, bro, I ain't got no slaves. I don't know what you're talking about. These people you calling slaves ain't slaves. I don't know them. Them ain't slaves. I ain't got no slaves. Nobody you calling slaves is over here with me. Nah, not at all. Absolutely not at all. So I don't know what you're talking about, bro. Then the Portuguese, and see, he go to context. 50 years of this. 50 years of this. The Portuguese, with the help of the Mbangalas, was conquering and claiming the people and the rulers of the Ndongo lands as slaves. They had enslaved these people. They either sent them in the transatlantic, and those who didn't go, they kept them as slaves. And Nzinga seemed to have created the conditions for the first popular Mbandu uprising against the Portuguese exploitation. She attracted to her cause Mbandu Sobas, who had become part of Portuguese Angola, including 109 Sobas in the province of Hari, who had become allies of the Portuguese Luis Mendes Vasconcelos, governor, but now refused to send tribute to de Sousa. Many Mbandu supported Nzinga because they wanted to see their land led by a ruler who was a descendant of the ancient kings rather than a puppet of the Portuguese. The uprising had been successful. De Sousa wrote in 1626 that he couldn't collect the tribute he had counted on because of the war and the uprising of Dona Ana and Nzinga, and because many of the Sobas of His Majesty have gone over to her side. Nzinga had thus created a political and military climate among the Mbandu that for the first time threatened the various foundation of which the Portuguese economic and political strength in Angola rested. De Sousa summed up the situation subtly in a letter on August 1625 to the king. He noted that he was particularly concerned about the armed slaves were joining Nzinga's rank. He's still calling these people slaves. The organized slaves, he feared, would empower her and weaken the kingdom and inspire the Sobas, who were enemies conquered by force, to join her as well. The uprising, he warned, would ruin Luanda because entire villages were fleeing. In fact, some Portuguese had already lost 150 slaves who fled together. Before I go any further, Brother Sutek, do you want to add anything there? Is there anything that stood out to you in the chronicler's writings about Nzinga and her having the power to withstand and get her word out to her people that had switched sides with the Portuguese, and they began to become de facto slaves, as the Portuguese would call them?
I mean, you just hit it. You just hit it. But I've been walking back and forth though, so I chime in when I spot something.
Gotcha. Now, faced with continued resistance from Nzinga, de Sousa and his cabinet decided to install their own handpicked candidate as the successor of Ndongo throne, while at the same time branding Nzinga as a usurper and sending troops to oust her and her relatives and supporters from their base in the Ndongo Islands. So now she ain't even the queen, or she ain't even the king no more. They finna get rid of her. She ain't doing what they thought that she would do. She ain't doing that. They need somebody that's gonna go in there, raid other people, pay tribute to them by bringing them bodies. See, this whole notion of paying tribute with bodies has to be put into context. Because is she enslaving the Mbandu? No. We ain't even got to that. Was Mbandu being enslaved? Yes. Who did the enslaving? The Portuguese. Who was the middleman? The Mbangalas. The Mbangala was raiding it because they had long-standing beef with the Mbandu, right? Some tribal stuff. So it was nothing. They was different people. They saw themselves as different. So the Portuguese used that to their favor. And the ones that defected, right? Those people that defected initially from the Mbandu kingdom, right? They would pay those fees to the Portuguese because the Portuguese was like, yo, I need my bodies. Where my body's at? You ain't even paid your tribute this month. You ain't pay your taxes, your body count. Provide them, sir. The Sosa informed the Portuguese king that he had deliberately selected a soba named Hari Kalanji, whom he knew to be both an enemy of Nzinga and a close relative to the place of the throne. Hari Kilanji was a descendant of Angola Kilanji Kiasamba, whose lineage had lost out to Nzinga's grandfather Kasinda. The two lineages had never resolved their differences, and during Angola Mbandi's reign, members of the competing lineage had become close allies with the Portuguese. Nzinga's election as ruler had been an affront to the members of this lineage, who believed that they were rightfully heirs to the throne, and tension resurfaced, especially as her popularity and audacity grew. Her assertions and authority over the Sobas, whose Luis Mendez de Vancalos had conquered, was particularly vexing. Several members of this lineage would figure prominently in war against Nzinga. Sometime in the summer of 1625, Nzinga moved against one of the older relatives of the rival lineage. Although her uncle had refused to accept Nzinga's election while he was making his way to the fort of Masangono with many of his people to have his eldest son baptized, Nzinga tracked him down, beheaded him, and captured most of his people. His son managed to escape with a few followers and ended up in Luanda, where he was brought up by the Jesuits. Nzinga's greatest rival within this competing lineage would be Angola Hari, half-brother of Hari Kalanji. Rulers of the lands called Hari, located in the naturally fortified region of Pango and Dongo. With Hari and Kalanji and Angola Hari had under their authority many Sobas who had become allied with Vencalos, the Sosa's governorship. Hari of Kalanji had become a vassal of the king, our lord, and Governor de Sosa considered him the legitimate inheritor of the Ndongo kingdom. See how they get played? Sometimes in the mid-1625, the Portuguese identified Kalanji as the king of Ndongo. De Sosa did not acknowledge, however, what was the Ndongo court advisors and the population at large questioned the status of Hari Kalanji and Angola Hari. Since both were descendants from lineages that were not considered eligible to rule, perhaps because of the murky background, Hari Kalanji was fearful of Nzinga, and in August 1625, he left Pongo Ndongo and traveled to the fort of Mbaka to request military bodyguard and troops. Although De Sosa was in negotiations with Nzinga at the time, he promised to honor Hari Kalanji's request and to launch a military campaign against Nzinga. This campaign involving forces, Sobas who supported Nzinga to comply with their obligation to send tribute and slaves and provisions and allow Portuguese troops to pass through their territories. He also wanted the Sobas to move against others who supported Nzinga. In 1625 of December, Kalanji went to the fort of Mbaka and was given a small military contingent to lead him back to the island. Once Nzinga discovered the Portuguese had provided Hari Kalanji with troops, she commanded her own forces to attack his island. At the same time, she dispatched officials to Luanda to meet De Sosa to press her claims against Kalanji. She complained that Hari Kalanji had stopped her people from traveling to a slave market near his lands and had confiscated the 48 slaves she had sent to the market. The governor dismissed the complaint and insisted sent 34 Portuguese soldiers, along with several African archers and combatants, to defend Hari Kalanji. When the reinforcements arrived, they fought Nzinga's forces. In spite of suffering numerous casualties and having some of the officials captured, her forces managed to kill 3 Portuguese, including the captain of 6 soldiers, whom they took to Nzinga. The captured officials from Nzinga's forces were sent to Luanda, where they would confess that Hari Kalanji had not taken Nzinga slaves at all, but Nzinga had waged war against him for going to the fort without asking her permission, and she considered this treason and a rebellion against her. Having gotten this information he wanted out of them, the governor put the captives on a slave ship and sent them to Brazil to be sold in the slave trade. You see how this is going? The finger's pointing in one direction, and the direction that it's pointing in ain't even telling you none of this. Why was this never part of the discussion? Because real research methodology doesn't matter. Don't nobody have to do that. Historical context doesn't matter. Nobody needs that. All because she's a B, an H. They ran trains on her. What you want to call her? Right? It's easy to disrespect this woman in her death, but you're trying to tarnish her legacy by insinuating your ignorance and your emotionalism that you're projecting on her as a mere fact. And people entertain that. And it's okay. I get it. I mean, everybody would love to have hundreds of people watching their shows and just be splurting out gibberish all dang on day to entertain the people that's tuned in and listening and telling them to hit the like button while you continue to to unleash a verbal assault on a historical figure who you haven't even studied. So let me do this real quick. It's about that time that I bring back in the expert. And we're going to get about 10 minutes of her, and then we'll get back to this context.
So, the Capuchin, who is this woman? Whatever comes in front of such a noble woman, this is Capuchin. Okay, this letter I got by going to Venice, looking at Sacado archives in Venice of the Capuchin. You don't just get it seen in America here and say you get all these things. You know, you got to go and dig out everything. Okay, and here this precious letter. The noble woman and queen, a great testament can be given to you by the Portuguese gentlemen, against whom during 30 continuous years, from 1625 to 1655, she performed repeated attacks and perils of war, right? Her rock-like value, given it different destinies, 30, 40, 50,000, 100,000, he exaggerates here. But they're using bows and arrows. But with this usual kind of army of her people, serving herself as what? Guide? Captain. She is leading her army. She's not behind, mobilizing. She's right in front. And here he tells you, twice she was able to kill in battle the commander of the Portuguese army. And once as she heard the news that between the other dead bodies, there was the noblest knight that had been in Luanda, right? What did she do? She ordered that his head was brought to her, and she received it with her hands. I mean, said the Portuguese said, "We can't deal with this woman." You know what I mean? This is a woman. I'm not making this up. You see this? You know, these are all in Italian. I have to translate all of this. I just want to say that is a wonderful kind of a life because I said, "Oh my gosh, man, that's my kind of woman," and she sort of she's there in your face, man. They said, no, she comes to you and and when she sees the Dutch right there, Jenga's defense. Okay, she's strategic. She has to have a defense. I have complained so much to the past governors who have always promised they're taking her sister. If you see on the handout I have, her sister, one sister was drowned in the river, right? The Kwanzaa River, in a whirlpool. Her other sister was taken as a captive and kept in Luanda. Every time the Portuguese says, send us banzos. Banzos is a group of goods, including slaves, right? That she sends in negotiation. She says here, I have sent infinite slaves and dozens of banzos and other export, and she was never returned. But after wars were made to disquiet me, and make me always go about as a jagger, those terrible soldiers, using tyrannies against me, such as not allowing children to be born. This being the style of the Quilombo. You're moving about all the time. You're not in any stable place. So the law was that you don't have children in the Quilombo. But, so maybe she doesn't like children. Well, here is Gaeta. And he says, and such was the queen's love for children that she could not bear to be without them in their presence. And she had a nephew, which in fact she saved. And he, in fact, eventually goes and takes over and becomes the king. She played and enjoyed herself with them. And having passed the age of Massino, I've been trying to say, who was Massino? I've looked up in Greek mythology, in Latin. If you know who is Massino, let me know. Because he must have lived a whole long set of life. Because Njinga lived until 81. And he said, she's living again beyond the age of Massino. When he became the king, clamored and cried to give birth to a child. And Cavazzi says, sometimes he said, you can't have children, you're long past the age. But she said, God can do anything. We've heard that, those of us who know, I'm an Episcopalian. We have miraculous birth. Who knows? Okay? So she said, it can happen. It didn't happen, right? But she said, as soon as I settle down, life is going to return to normal as I had it when I was growing up in my father's court. When I was his favorite, she always thinks she was her father's favorite. He didn't like her brother at all. He was too weak. They had these games and she always won. That's what she told Cavazzi. She was always there. She said at 70 years, she receives a letter from the Pope and she goes out and does this military dance with her soldiers. And Cavazzi, he's scratching his head. This woman is so old, but here she is dancing this military dance. She was she was strong. So any strong person, the end comes, and we have it recorded. It's fascinating. And we have the records and we have the actual description of the debates that were going on around Njinga's bed with the Capuchin priest, Cavazzi, there, giving the last rites and so on. And the traditional priest said, no, we have to carry all the rituals, our own rituals. She has to be dressed in elaborate clothes, stringed love clothes. So it's very interesting that if you read his diary, the manuscript, you see all this description of the elaborate cloth that Njinga was buried in and the whole thing with the scene, and I described some of it in the book. All the cloth and wealth that was put into that tomb. But he also said Njinga had wanted to be buried in a Capuchin monk's habit. So here in the published and private sources, you see here's Njinga, and he did describe that Njinga had they put a young person to hold Njingas up because they did not want to let the people know that Njinga had died. Okay? Because the rumor was Njinga would not die. And if Njinga dies, who was responsible for it? The Capuchin. You know, you do whatever witchcraft you did, that's why you had Queen die. Okay, so here is these young men, by the way, these figures here. Njinga had the Capuchin train a group of young men to be members of the Nossa Senora de Rosario. That's the brotherhood. If you're Catholic, you know that you have different lay brotherhoods, and Nossa Senora, or Lady of the Rosary, is one that was specifically identified with Africans. In fact, there was a Lady of the Rosary in Luanda, you know, even before those enslaved Africans came to Brazil and to the Americas. So religion was very much amazing. Njinga was living in a world where she was interacting with her own religious belief and with European Christian religious belief, and she was able to kind of live in both of them. So here is the published version, the manuscript that I showed you. This is in the watercolor. It's in the manuscript. Here is what you would see if you see the published version of Cavazzini's book.
Now, you heard me several times in this conversation bring up Cavazzi. Cavazzi's writing during the time of the reign of Queen Nzinga, or the whole Ndongo kingdom while he's there. He's a chronicler. He's giving his eyewitness accounts. Now, the rebellion that Nzinga had stirred up in Mbandu was still widespread and successful in 1626. De Souza and other Portuguese officials had to find a way to justify the full-scale war that they were planning against her. They decided to focus on Nzinga's gender as a grounds for disqualification to the throne. Writing to the Portuguese king in February 1626, De Souza declared Nzinga an illegitimate ruler and argued that Hari Kalanji was the rightful ruler of Ndongo because a woman had never governed the kingdom. In a subsequent letter written 2 weeks later, De Souza said that Nzinga's war against the Portuguese threatened the colonial power's entire conquest because so many Sobas were joining Nzinga and taking Portuguese slaves with them to wage war against us. Hari Kalanji was the legitimate ruler, claimed De Souza, because he was an ally of the Portuguese. Nzinga dismissed his claims outright and proceeded to demonstrate to Portuguese that her gender did not in any way hinder her leading in Ndongo. Her refusal to allow the Portuguese to delegitimize her right to rule would spur her on in her resistance. Once Nzinga learned that De Souza and other officials in Luanda voted to mount a just war against her, capture her, and proclaim Hari Kalanji as the king of Ndongo, she sharpened her leadership style and surrounded herself with a group of devoted officials who protected her from capture. She spent 2 years in Ndongo Islands, which allowed her to orchestrate the general uprising from her base there. To communicate directly with her officials and Sobas and participate in military operations, she found herself in danger of being captured, and the island themselves provided her with a route to safety. Linked to Luanda by a road that passed through Pangu and Ndongo, the islands were also connected to a nearby region in Dombo Pibo, home of Nzinga's maternal relatives. Nzinga was assured of safe passage through many regions because so many Sobas resented De Souza's policies of reopening the markets. What markets? The slave markets. They resented opening up the slave markets and installing Portuguese overseers, a situation that forcibly integrated the Sobas in the Portuguese commercial network, threatening their income and prestige while enhancing that of the Portuguese. Despite her rising popularity and success against the Portuguese, Nzinga realized that she was not yet prepared for all-out war. So she turned to diplomacy as a delayed tactic. Her emissaries promised De Souza that peace would return to Ndangu under Nzinga's leadership and that the slave markets would once again be teeming with slaves. When Portuguese forces arrived at the fort of Mbaka in February 1626, Nzinga set up her top envoys to Luanda to lay out the position. They indicated that she was ready to accept missionaries and make peace. Okay? They're calling this the delay. This is a delay in diplomacy. She's doing whatever she can at this juncture to cause a delay. Why is she causing a delay? I just told y'all. She knew that she was not ready or prepared for an all-out war. So she would be in agreements to open back up those slave markets, those slave markets, and those routes to those slave markets, which she had blocked for quite some time. So now she's being tactical in what she's doing because she needs to get ready. And what better way to get ready than be a distraction, to not be a distraction? Now, they also presented several questions to De Souza. Why had the captain of Mbaka provided military assistance to Kalanji when he knew that Kalanji was Nzinga sober and subject? And why had the captain at the fort treated her so poorly? The envoy made it clear that he was speaking on behalf of Nzinga by concluding that he had come to the city to do for his lady and she had ordered him. De Souza's response was not encouraging. He told the envoy the choice was now up to Nzinga. She could either choose war or peace as she wished. A few days later, Nzinga made a second attempt at negotiations, sending private spokesmen to Mbaka with a letter captured Portuguese soldiers to the military commander. The letter noted that although the prisoners had suffered the indignity of being taken of Nzinga's nude, she had immediately ordered them dressed, and from that point on, they had been well treated and supplied with ample food every 3 days. The prisoners praised Nzinga's officials for their humane treatment, and fairness. These prisoners that the Portuguese called slaves said that the sister was very humane, treated them with respect, fed them several times a day. It's going down. There would be a small price for ransoming them, the letter concluded. The governor would need to turn over Nzinga, one of her sobas, who Portuguese had captured, and deport Kalanji to the Americas or Portugal. So now Nzinga's like, look, I'm going to give you your people back. But here's a letter from your people. You see how respectful I've been to your people? They ain't got no problems. They eating good every day. But I'm going to send you your people back. But when I send you your people back, you need to send Kalanji to America. You need to ship him over there. Or you need to send him on up there to Portugal. Either way, he can't be around here. After the commander read the letter, the Mohi verbally repeated each detail contained in it. This sort of oral communications was an integral part of Ndangu policy. He dismissed Nzinga's attempt at negotiations, telling the Mohi that he had no time to seriously consider Nzinga or her offer, and if she did not hand over the Portuguese captives, he would send his men to look for them. The soldier recognized Nzinga's move as a delaying tactic meant to buy time either to secure reinforcements to defend the island or to plan her escape. Captain Cardoso, the former governor who had forged an alliance with the Mbangalas against Nzinga's father, Mbandi Angola, was at the time on his way from the Masagamo to Mbaka, and De Souza urged him to gather up all the neutral sobers among the military contingents and make their way quickly to the island. Cardoso complied, forcing many sober to join the army against Nzinga and beheading those who resisted. Look, we finna go get Nzinga. You going with us? If you ain't going with us, you die. So get down and lay down. You gonna partake in this jacking. You gonna partake in what we're about to do to this girl. You're not finna sit back on your hands and be able to do the things that you want to do on your own merit. Nah, you gonna come put in some work with us. That's what he said. But this aggression did not deter Nzinga from continuing her efforts of negotiation settlement. She kept persisting. So on the 8th of March in 1626, Cardoso's troops were preparing to leave Kambambi, where they had stopped on the way to Mbaka after the roundups. And Nzinga's Makunzis arrived there with a letter written a few days earlier and addressed the captain general in the fort. Once again, she had laid out her reasons for attacking Hari Kalanji. He had attacked her army and confiscated the slaves she had sent to comply with her duties as a vassal according to the agreement with her brother and I had made with the Portuguese. In truth, she asserted, she had the right to attack Hari because he was her vassal, and indeed, Portuguese forces that she had welcomed in her lands had attacked her army. Although the presence of the Portuguese army in her lands concerned her, she had welcomed them nonetheless, since she regarded herself as a Christian and thus as a vassal of the King of Spain, whom she recognized and obeyed as a Christian that I am. And Nzinga did admit that her forces had captured six Portuguese soldiers. She also noted that she had received news of a large number of Portuguese troops on their way, who were awaiting word to move against her and free the 6 captives. But she warned that nothing would be resolved by force, and she would move and be harmful to both herself and the prisoners if that happened. The letter ended on a threatening note. If there were settlers who had convinced the governor and the captain to launch a war so they could get out of debt, a reference to the slave trade, they were welcome to do so, but she herself wished Captain Cardoso no harm. You can come, my brother, but it ain't gonna be the way you want it to be. Interesting. So she was doing several other missives to the Portuguese officials in the coming years, and Nzinga included a paragraph requesting a variety of personal items, among the hammock, some wool, a cover for a horse, wine, wax, candles, muslin lace tablecloths, brimmed hats, blue velvet, 100 filings of paper for her official correspondences. She signed her baptismal name, Anna. But for the first time in a writing, she presented herself with the title Queen of Dongo or Ndongo. With this letter and with the dueling signatures, she signaled both her willingness to be a Christian and her determination to assert her authority in Ndongo as a legitimate ruler. Cardoso's response in March 15 dismissed all of that. The captain rebutted every assertion Nzinga put forth about her rights and her every accusation against the Portuguese, underscoring her own failure to comply with the promise she had made. He maintained that Nzinga had refused to hand over Portuguese slaves who had fled to her ranks. So that was an issue for him, and he denied her the items she had requested. He could not deliver them to her, he wrote, because he was already on his way to bringing the war to her. So he ended the letter with the dire warning: God protect you if he can. So he ends his letter with a threat. Yep. So in Nzinga's effort to find a peaceful solution for conflicts with the Portuguese during the first 2 years of rule of Ndongo, she often underscored her willingness to live as a Christian, to give her officials permission to be baptized and allow missionaries to work in Ndongo. Although De Souza and other officials never took this seriously, Nzinga seemed to have regarded spirituality as a vital part of her leadership style. She expanded the role of indigenous beliefs and customs beyond what they had accompanied during her grandfather's and father's reigns, and added to them the dedication to Christianity. And the first glimpse we have of Nzinga emphasizing spirituality comes after successful negotiations on behalf of Mbandi in Luanda. That was in 1622. That's when she agreed to prolong her stay for months and that she would be officially prepared to be baptized. After giving that commitment in Dongo traditions, why did Nzinga agree to be baptized? Many provincial lords or sobers in Ndongo, including members of her own lineage, had undergone elaborate public baptisms. And Nzinga was well aware that that religion was a core component of Portuguese politics. Religion was a core component of Portuguese politics. So although Mbandi had allowed Nzinga to get baptized, and her agreement to do so probably had more to do with the role she envisioned spirituality playing in her own efforts to take over leadership of Ndongo than it did advancing her brother's political agenda. Nzinga may have also had calculated by undergoing baptism, she would gain respect from the Portuguese and garner the support of a large number of Christian Mbandus who were either slaves in the city and plantations or had fled wars and become refugees. Maybe this explains why Nzinga threw herself so enthusiastically into preparations for the ceremony, listening attentively to the governor explain the benefits of conversion, where she stood to the gain by forsaking Mbandu rites and rituals. She readily complied when the church appointed a priest knowledgeable in Kimbandu to teach her the catechism. And no appointed day, in the presence of the nobility and people, she solemnly underwent the ceremony in the official church of the Jesuits had built in Luanda. Governor de Souza himself was her godfather, and Ana da Silva, her hostess, served as godmother. And Nzinga received the baptismal name Ana de Souza in honor of both godfathers. Now, do y'all get it? De Souza was there when she was baptized. He had taken into account to be her godfather. She played the game that well that she even changed her name to align with his name. But he had enough of her, getting her people back from him. Despite her baptism and her acceptance of the church gift, Nzinga never rejected her own Mbandu religious beliefs. Order rituals that were so essential to Ndongo's ruling elite and ordinary villages alike. Indeed, during her stay in Luanda, Nzinga never once removed the several iron rings and relics that adorn her arms and legs, but she embraced her new religion, at least on the surface. On the first leg of her return journey from Kabasa, surrounded the officials' entourage provided the governor, Nzinga proudly displayed the Christian icons she had been given, reassuring her escorts of her deep pity. The Portuguese detail remained with Nzinga only as on the outskirts of Luanda, and so did her response. Soon after the Portuguese departed, Nzinga removed the Christian symbols from her person and placed them for safekeeping in their religious quarries. So, according to a later account by missionary Kavazi, she performed various heathen ceremonies to safeguard her journey back to Kabasa and put on her satanic relics used by the Ethiopian Africans and sold by their priests. So when she was going to be around the Portuguese, she would put on the crosses. But as soon as they leave, it's like the Debo effect. When Debo come around, oh, you quiet? Yeah, I'm going to be quiet. But when he leave, I'm going to be talking again. From 1622 to 24, Nzinga maneuvered that way. She would alternate from Christianity to her traditional beliefs. In fact, for decades later, Nzinga would admit to Cavaza that on several occasions during those 2 years, she had deliberately counseled Mbandi against baptism. Nzinga may have feared that Mbandi's own baptism would jeopardize her hard-won special status. While advising Mbandi to shun baptism, Nzinga also promoted Mbandu spiritual beliefs. Taking charge of the public ceremonies where local religious practitioners called on the ancestors, burned incense, performed human sacrifices, and participated in dances and rituals. Nzinga attempted to demonstrate her familiarity with Mbandu traditions and began in earnest with her brother's death in 1624, where she then organized an elaborate funeral for him in Kendongo Islands that included the ritual sacrifice of a number of servants who would accompany him to the land of the ancestors. Nzinga also preserved some of her brother's remains, respectively removing several bones from Mbandi's corpses. She arranged them at a handmade silver plates covered with them in a rich carpet and placed them in a portable reliquary chest, similar to the ones Ndongo religious practitioners carried. With this act, Nzinga made the Miset the vocal point of veneration that in time would be associated with the rituals involving human sacrifice, lighted vessels, incense, and the like. Nzinga's practice of human sacrifice and the keeping, consulting the bones of her ancestors would scandalize the European missionaries when they learned of it. Nzinga's letter to the governor, de Souza, and the Portuguese officials during the 2 years of negotiations that preceded her accession to the throne provided significant insight in the role of religion would play during her reign. In a letter to the governor, de Souza, soon after he took up the post in Luanda in 1624 of June, Nzinga noted that she wanted Jesuit missionaries to come to her lands, baptize those who would wish to become Christians. In doing so, Nzinga was presenting a vision of Christian presence in Ndongo, where she and her officials and our missionaries would oversee its spread. Aware that members of her own lineage allied with the Portuguese were seeking baptism, Nzinga did not wish to stop priests from coming to Ndongo, but instead she wanted to be the one who determined how this priest reached the population. De Souza ignored all of that. He had his own plans and settings for religious presence in Ndongo. In fact, by June of 1624, the church correspondence had listed Ndongo as one of the locations where the king of Angola resides, and which needed to have at least one residence that could accommodate 6 missionaries. Whether Nzinga was aware of these plans or not, she did remember what had happened in Mbaku during her brother's reign, where the governor, Vasconcelos, had established a Portuguese brotherhood to oversee construction of a church called Our Lady of the Assumption in Mbaku, a short distance from Ndongo, capital of the Kabasa. To fund the construction, he had several Sabas in the region, including one of Nzinga's relatives, Angola, Kanani, to send their tribute of payments to the brotherhood instead of Kabasa. As the new ruler of Ndongo, Nzinga wanted such initiatives to be under her control. Portuguese priests accompanied the army, and Nzinga knew had full authority over the religious life of the conquered people. The situation was complicated, however, by the fact that Nzinga did not consider Ndongo a conquered area. De Souza made it clear to Nzinga concerning the letter sent to the King of Spain in December 1624. Dona Ana, Lady of Angola, is very much pressing me to keep the pledge that Governor de Souza gave her to change the fortress of Mbanku, and that soon she will move to the mainland and will have the priests from the Company Jesuits brought in and will build churches. Every letter Nzinga sent to de Souza and Cardoso between 1625 and August of 1626 made reference to places she was making for Christianity and missionaries in Ndongo, as did the verbal messages from her officials relayed. Indeed, during that time, the Sobas against whom she carried out attacks were often relatives of her own who had been baptized and who had become or intended to become Portuguese allies without her permission. It is impossible to know whether Nzinga would have collaborated with the missionaries, as she did several years later if De Souza had responded positively to a request and meetings with the officials from the church. The fact was that Christian conversion was an integral part of Portuguese policy in Angola, and governors and officials, including Jesuits, continued to view the spread of Catholic Christianity under the Portuguese control as a core element of the colonial project. De Souza himself brought up the several letters to the king. In an extensive missive written in August 1625, he warned the King of Spain that he was skeptical about Nzinga's request for missionaries and said that he believed she was acting more out of fear than devotion. He proposed a safeguard if the king were to send 2 missionaries to the fort of Mbanka, Nzinga should first be required to give them some slaves, and only then would missionaries proceed to Ndogo. If they went to Ndogo before Nzinga handed over the slaves, the social wrote, would be the reason to make war against her, and the missionaries should be held back. Authorities in Lisbon and Reseda made similarly dubious accounts remain suspicious of Nzinga as well. Members of the religious hierarchy of Luanda were no different from their predecessors who had fully supported Portuguese conquest of Ndongo's land and the enslavement of a population during the reigns of Nzinga's grandfather and father. When the governor or the officials presented the case for war against Nzinga, the religious authorities were full agreement. Written on in 1626 of February, theologians from the College of Jesuits in Luanda agreed that the war was necessary and just. Now, the army of De Souza assembled to fight Nzinga, and our troops consisted of an usual mix of Portuguese soldiers and Mbandu archers and Cambares. The troops left Luanda on the 7th of February, 1626, under the leadership of Cardoso, a seasoned commander in wars against Ndongo. The Portuguese were seen off with the usual celebratory martial music and words of encouragement from De Souza, and reminded them that their purpose was to fight in the service of God, the King of Spain, and the good of the kingdom. After the group arrived in Masangano, Cardoso received word from the governor De Souza to head directly to Pongo Ndongo, and he arrived there on March the 30th. Pongo Ndongo became the base of the Portuguese operations against Nzinga, and its natural fortifications and its easy accessibility to the Kendongo Islands, where her forces were based. So throughout April, the 2 Portuguese commanders leading the military operations against Nzinga, which was Cardoso and Diaz, attacked the powerful Sobas in Mosica around the fort of Kambambe and the Ndongo itself and forced their submission. The conquered Sobas were crucial to Portuguese success because they supplied them with much needed provisions and led their troops into battle in the war against Nzinga. Once the war began in the core of the Ndongo, where Nzinga enjoyed her greatest support, her primary tactical problem was to keep lines of communication open to the Sobas who still supported her. She knew the Portuguese had posted spies and who reported the movements along the route between the islands and the mainlands. The hindrance to the good communication was extremely detrimental and dangerous to Nzinga because Ndongo had become even more politically fragmented during her brother's reign, and Nzinga knew she could not rely on Soba's loyalty, even those who had been her core supporters. When the Soba of Angola, Daga Sosa, for example, saw Cardoso bombard his stronghold and kill all the people, he requested a pardon from the governor and explained that although during De Souza's governorship he had obeyed Nzinga, now his loyalty was to Haraj Kalanji and the King of Portugal. In the future, he promised he would do whatever the governor wanted to do. The successful military campaigns by De Souza against the Sobas along the Kwanzaa River spurred many of them to switch alliances. So now Nzinga is losing her alliances. This was, this continued to transpire. As soon as the Mbandu would get weak, they switch. The tide had turned against Nzinga, and she could no longer even rely on the unmitigated support of the people. Her mother, in her mother's birthplace. The Sobers here, who had close relations with his now defeated counterpart Masika, had been among Nzinga's most loyal supporters and had refused Cardoso's demand for military assistance. They even had captured some of the Cambaras who were passing through the islands on their way to the Portuguese camps in Pongo and Ungo. In retaliation, Cardoso arrested the Soba and some of the Marcotes and eventually sent a number of captives to Luanda to be exported and sold into slavery in America. You go against the Portuguese, they catch you, they sell you. She's at war with the Portuguese and resistance right now, and we still haven't heard one word of her enslaving and selling anyone. She's ruling right now. She ain't letting the slave markets open. She's trying to delay as much as possible because she knows she's not ready for a full-scale war. So she's trying to figure out a way that she can delay this thing and win in the end. But the pressure coming is being applied. The Portuguese are here. Time was certainly not on Nzinga's side. The Sousa pressed Cardoso during the last week of May of 1626 to get his troops to the island and take it before she became stronger. To prepare for the Portuguese attack, Nzinga gathered many soldiers to protect herself and the supporters who had joined her. One such soldier, whom the Portuguese captured after she left the island, provided the only eyewitness account of Nzinga's military preparations. He reported that she protected the island by heavily fortifying them with trenches. On Danji, she had carved out an entrance in the Great Rock and dug well-camouflaged caves that served as natural hiding places. Around that island, she had stationed the Mbandu soldiers who were armed with pretty much arquebuses and rifles they had brought with them when they fled the Portuguese army. She also constructed defenses on the islands where she stationed additional troops. He telling everything. Because Nzinga did not have enough arms to face Cardoso's army and had not been able to mobilize forces on the mainland, she had stocked the island with provisions, livestock, and people in preparation for a prolonged siege. Despite some weaknesses, Nzinga remained a dangerous enemy. She was popular with the Mbandus and Cardoso's army and might still persuade many of them to abandon him to join her. Her provisions might ensure her a large measure of popularity, but Nzinga knew this wasn't enough. Even in Cardoso's and Mbandus fighting join her, she still needed other allies. As she faced imminent invasion, she retained some indirect support from nearby, who sent her supplies, but they lacked critical support of the Mbangala. Although her estranged husband, Kasa, who had fought alongside her brother Mbandi, and whose base was still nearby, was now an enemy of the Portuguese, he failed to send any aid to Nzinga. The military operations against Nzinga began in the week of May 1626 and ended in July, the last week of July. Cardoso and Diaz troops camped at the western edge of the region today called Baexa de Kansaji, and crossed over to the islands using canoes, fishing boats, and two vessels specially built for the campaign. Nzinga has set up a coordinate system of defense. As the Portuguese boats approached the inland, soldiers, many of them Cambaras who had deserted the Portuguese army, fired volleys from the muskets and shot arrows from their positions on the island. Nzinga's troops were not taken by surprise because Nzinga had devised an intricate system of communication among sentry stations and guardhouses and naturally protected lookouts on each island who rang bells to warn approaching troops. Nzinga stationed most of her best troops at Mapolo Island, which Cardoso and Diaz choose to capture first. Since it serves as an entryway to others, Nzinga soldiers fought valiantly using a range of Portuguese and African arms and techniques, including bow and arrows, flintlock bows, spears, and fire-handed logs. Because Nzinga soldiers were embedded inside trenches, the Portuguese had to capture each trench individually. Many of these Portuguese who were fortunate enough to escape death by drowning, gunshot wounds, or arrows, met with their demise succumbed to injury instead from wounds received in the fighting to take over the trenches. Nevertheless, the Portuguese emerged victorious, having killed many of Nzinga's bravest, and were rewarded with provisions, cattle, and all the unnecessary stuff that troops get. Leaving the garrison of Mapolo, Cardoso then captured a second island, was the headquarters of Nzinga's Tendala, the chief. This island was even better fortified than the first, and most of Nzinga's best fighters were stationed here. As was the case of Mapala, Nzinga's troops suffered great losses and had abandoned the island, and then they were overwhelmed by Portuguese firepower. This island too offered ample provision and large population, even accounting for many of them drowned while trying to escape to other islands. Despite the Portuguese victory, Cardoso ultimately enslaved 150 captives because of the many people had escaped. He took to the Tendalas Island for his headquarters, from which troops fanned out and conquered other islands, including one in which the commander of Ndongo forces had been stationed, with troops as well as a few Mangalas. In addition, Cardoso secured the island on which the Memwene Lumba, another high official, had his quarters. In effect, Cardoso summoned a naval blockade around the island Danji, where Nzinga had set up her court. Now remember, they done captured a couple of islands. She's losing. She got de factos among her, and she got spies on the inside. And she still ain't sold what they call slave yet. The Portuguese still had the upper hand, and Nzinga was isolated on her island fortress without the ability to do order and supplies of ammunition and people. But Cardoso was able to receive reinforcements, and a troop landed in Danji on July the 12th without encountering any resistance. And Nzinga did hold a trump card, however. The 6 Portuguese hostages whom she had captured at the beginning of the war and were being held at headquarters, she decided to try to use them as a hostage tactic to delay the Portuguese military to attack against her long enough that her remaining supporters could escape safely to Tunda. From her fortified base, she dispatched a messenger to meet with Cardoso, knowing that he had Nzinga concerned. He was dismissive of the declaration that Nzinga was an obedient daughter of the captain, and that she wished to know why he was making war against her, and that she was willing to travel to where his camp was located in Tabi and surrender with her court in 3 days. Expressing impatience with Nzinga, Cardoso told the Mankazi that this lady had no shame. She should know that the Portuguese had taken up arms against her because she failed to comply with their judgments and had been made against her. After receiving Cardoso's response, Nzinga went another representative, this time her in Mwalumbu, whose messenger was no different than a Mubazi. Although he realized that Nzinga was stalling, he wanted to make sure she would hand over the 6 Portuguese hostages. Nzinga complied, and before the deadline had expired, Mwalumbu had returned with the 6 healthy-looking Portuguese captives, as well as an additional message for Cardoso. Nzinga wanted no more damage done to the island, and she wanted the Portuguese vassals and the wonder she would appear in his camp in person with the members of her court within 3 days to sign a treaty. In discussing her offer, Cardoso and some of the veterans' early campaigns referred Nzinga as warlike. Even though she was a woman and the queen of a king, she called herself because she did not like to admit that she was a woman. Following the discussion, Cardoso ordered to tell Nzinga that she had 2 days or 3 to hand over the Cambaros who had deserted the Portuguese army. Cardoso returned to his base in Tabi, where he waited for her to appear, but surrendering the Cambaros would have been tantamount to admitting defeat. So while Cardoso waited, Nzinga ordered her best fighters to retreat under cover of the knights and canoes, braving the guns and arrows of the Portuguese sentries fired. She also instructed the people to burn the boats that Cardoso planned to use against her fortifications the following night, and to set fire to the food supplies she had hoarded. She herself escaped the Tandu right under the noses of the Cardozo's troops. Although they pursued her, they may have been too exhausted to thoroughly search the many large caves in the region of Kina, where she and her people hid on the way to Tunda. Whatever the reason, by the time Cardozo sent out his scouts in hot pursuit, they had no idea which route she took. Now, the Sobas and other Mbandus who had remained on the island, they killed many Portuguese with their arrows, but many of them died from bullet wounds or drowned while trying to escape. Now, there's no question that skillful diplomatic ploys were at least partly responsible for Nzinga's escape, but her manipulation of Mbandu's spirituality may have also helped. Sometime before she escaped, she had made an ideological shift as momentous as the one she had made in 1622, when she decided to be baptized in Luanda. Cardoso's troops pressed in her hideout, and Nzinga realized that the Portuguese would never accept her as a ruler of Ndongo. By then, she also knew that they were intent on replacing her with their own candidate. Aware that she would survive as the leader of Ndongo without a firm commitment of Mbandu spirituality, she deployed the relics she had made from the bones of Angola Mbandi. Nzinga knew that according to Mbandi's spiritual beliefs, Mbandi was a stronger spiritual force as a deceased king than he would have been as a living one. And she took advantage of this belief so that her supporters would have full faith in her decision. If she abandoned the island without paying proper deference to her dead brother, she would risk her vengeance and jeopardize the support of the followers. Thus, at some point before evacuating, she called on her priests to perform the rituals that would allow them to communicate with the spirit of Mbandi. During the ceremony, Mbandi's spirit possessed the priest, who communicated his desires and warned Nzinga that becoming a vassal of the Portuguese was to lose freedom and become a slave, and that it was better to retain one's liberty by flight. And Nzinga took this advice and honored her brother by sacrificing 14 young women on this grave. By carefully following Mbandi's counsel, Nzinga illustrated to her followers that she had the blessing of the ancestors to continue to resist against the Portuguese. From the time she made the decision to venerate her brother's relics until her death in 1663, Nzinga would manipulate spirituality and make it a central element in her statecraft. She added new elements to it when necessary, but always ensured that she ultimately controlled it. I like to appreciate everybody for tuning in to part 4 of the legacy of Queen Nzinga. That was very, very interesting of her. Fight or flight, her adjustments politically, the delay tactics, the maneuvering, the strategy, the whole 9 yards. Although the Portuguese never complied or never felt like she was serious about those things, it's just the mere fact that she was willing to try whatever she could to rule her kingdom and to reestablish hope among her people. As she proved weaker than the Portuguese, she was still fueled by resistance, even in her fleeing. She kept to her traditional beliefs when she needed to save face among her people, and she would cross-dress when she was in front of the Portuguese, per se. But she never wavered because she did everything in hopes of restoring the kingdom of Ndongo. If we get to a point of getting to a part 5 here, which we may, we'll find more things out. But there's a serious topic in this discussion that needs to be dealt with. And no matter how much clarity or historical context we provide, we may have to jump ahead just to deal with some stuff that's just outright wrong. It's outright wrong. So I don't know if Brother Sutek is going to press that issue, but I know he's organized his facts to deal with it. And He's going to deal with what he want to deal with when he get ready. This is why I asked in part 1 or part 2, have anyone ever, excuse me, been to war? If you've ever been in a situation where you've been invaded, or have you done the invading? Because tactically, you deal with those things like that, and you gain that perspective, and then you understand when you're in a situation where you're trying to protect your people, you're gonna do so by any means necessary. And if anybody think that we are justifying the enslavement and the trading of people from Angola, you're out of your mind. That is not the case here. This is why context is key. This is why we do what we do. See, a lot of people don't know these details that we're providing and where they're coming from and so forth. You just, you're paying attention to assumptionists who are emotionally driven, and they're playing on your emotion. And just to be real, people are playing on your emotions. So now you're ignorant enough to believe them. And when I say ignorant, I mean by definition, just basically means you don't know, to believe them, because a lot of this information in detail is new to a lot of people. They really don't discuss Nzinga like that, or her legacy. They don't go down and get into detail the fact that this woman here had endured so much and seen so much as just a child. So now we're at that point where she's ruling. It's her turn. She's dealing with similar things that her brother, her father, and her grandfather had dealt with. And she's recognizing the power of the Portuguese, especially when she says things like, we're not prepared to go to war. I don't have the arms to withstand the Portuguese, right? She's being honest right there, because she's not ready to. But the moment that she can acquire and take up arms and have the army powerful enough to defend, then she's going to do that by any means necessary. So when you hear Dr. Heywood mention, or anyone mentioning the alignment with the Dutch, she sees the opportunity. I know that's getting ahead a little bit, but now you can see why she's seizing the opportunity to align herself with the Dutch, who the Dutch in return, and this is funny, the Dutch in return, they wanted what the Portuguese had. They wanted a piece of what the Portuguese controlled in Angola. It's just that simple. We spend so much time on belittling her legacy that we don't even take into the account what this lady's fighting for, what her family had been resisting for 100 years. Yeah, they had guns. She had some guns, but she didn't have as many as the Portuguese had. She didn't have the type of weaponry that they had. They reside to guerrilla warfare while others could do other things. So when we get to part 5 of this, whenever we get to it, I might pre-record it. I don't know. It depends. Or if I'm up early enough in the daytime, it'll be done and people can just catch the replay. But when we get to it, we want to see more and more of these tactics and more of her political and military prowess. We're going to see what type of leader this lady was, if she was a leader at all. Should she be commemorated? That's not a debate. because people can honor who they want. Like you hear the argument about Jordan, Kobe, and LeBron. Many people think LeBron the best player to ever play. Many people think Kobe the best player to ever play. Many people think that Jordan best to ever play. And you got people in the older eras that give that up to Oscar Robertson. So that's just opinion driven when you're arguing about if someone should be commemorated and this, that, and the third. To you, that's an opinion. But if you just give your opinion, right? When you give your opinion and talking shit, you just in a barbershop cutting hair, acting like a psychiatrist, and a psychologist, and you just talking and talking and talking, and then you want to ask questions when you don't have answers to nothing. So you want to impose your ignorance on everyone else because you feel like, nah, we ain't got to do that over here. You can't tell us what to talk about. We're going to talk about what we want to talk about. We ain't got to have no type of methodology. Historical context don't matter. She was a B, she was a H, she was gay, she was a hoe, she was this, she was that. All of that's sensationalism, that's emotionalism. The moment a bunch of grown men start degrading a woman, shows you the type of character these people have. If you can attack her like that, I can attack you like that, buddy. You know what I'm saying? Come on, man. Y'all won't even be honest with yourselves. And I know you listening, Chef. You tuned in. Tell the truth to yourself. Do you think what you did and what you said and all of that, do you really you find that justified? You ain't even got any DNA related to the Angola area. You ain't from no Congo. She ain't enslaved you and put you on no ship. You ain't got no ties to Angola whatsoever. You just talking shit. Calling a Hitler and all of that. You don't even know what Hitler did, bro. How could you compare to Hitler? Come on, man. See, you in a realm now. You subject for scrutiny. So don't get emotional. Don't take it personal. Cause see, I'm not gonna attack you. It's not gonna be a personal attack on you. You know what I mean? To any of y'all, really. When it comes to scholarship, I just ain't gonna fool with y'all. But if y'all call me and y'all need me to do something, I'm gonna be down with you all the way 1,000. Now, if it's some scholastic stuff, I ain't gonna fool with y'all on it. Y'all pseudo, but you can't be pseudo killers. But outside your world of YouTube and ish talking, I can rock with y'all 1,000%. But when you just talking about stuff just to be talking out your ass, I'm not doing that no more. We got too much work to do, bro. We in the middle of a pandemic. Our people are ignorant of a lot of things, and we take scholarship real serious because it's a tool used to advance people. Research methodology and context advances people forward. It doesn't keep them stuck. So if you're going to provide a solution to the community, you have to give them a tool that they can utilize to advance themselves, their households, their neighbors, and their neighborhood and others around them. That tool is way more successful than anything. So for you to not want to adhere to some type of methodology when you're talking about his history and its right, and I'm not telling you what to talk about, but I'm just telling you the truth. If you're gonna talk about something, at least be accurate about it. Give historical context. Don't generalize. None of that. It makes no sense when you do that. You're just generalizing things. You're not handling your business that way. It's not how you do it. It's not. And I can say that because I'm criticizing your behavior. So think about it. Your mom, man, she no longer living. Neither is Nzinga. But your mother is no longer living. And you've told us this. We know this, right? Your mother's no longer living. How would you feel if someone down the line attacks your mother the way that you did in Nzinga? Verbally. They found out something your mother may have done in her childhood or high school years from someone who was involved in something that you've never known anything about, and um and she did these things, and then she went on to clean all of that up and become she served her purpose and explained why those things had to transpire. But they said to hell with all of that she went through. They began to shame your mother. You would want to kill them. The reality of it all is that you would want to kill them, because now they're attacking your mother. They're attacking your lineage. They're attacking the first person to ever care for you. So, be careful what you say. Be careful what you say. Words have consequences. So yeah, you can sit behind the mic and get caught up in your emotional rants and things of that nature and try to play on people's emotions in the chat. And you're looking for people to you're looking for people to agree with you. You're looking for people to agree with you so much so that you add people like AD, Thunder, all these other personalities to hop on a panel with you to disagree with the only person on the panel fighting for Nzinga at the time, Unc. You let Thunder on the panel, bro. You had AD on the panel, bro. And to top it all off, you had Variant on there, bro. That's insulting. All to try to play on slavery, which you never defined. And all of this started when you improperly stated that there was a slave market and slave trades before Europeans and Arabs in Africa, that they were doing this. They had a whole economic system. You said that. We didn't say that. You did, and you never proved it. And you refused to mute the noise. You just kept it up. You kept doubling down on it. Show after show after show after show after show. And I told you, and I said it in your chat, and I said it to Sosa. I said, that's how y'all rocking? I said, nah, it's personal. It's personal now. It's not fun and games no more. It's personal now. Because you just got a little too disrespectful. Not a little too disrespectful, a whole lot of disrespectful. So I decided to, instead of stoop down to your level, use you against you. And when I did that, you was like, oh, he ain't said nothing. He proved my point. No, I didn't. I took your points away because you lied. So when you sat on that panel and became emotional and started calling somebody's mother, somebody's grandmother, somebody's great grandmother, somebody's great great grandmother, somebody who's living today, whose ancestor that is, calling them bitches, hoes, talking about if she was gay or not, or if she was a homosexual or not, talking about her sexuality, a group of grown men talking about a female on a panel. How in the hell how did y'all succumb to that? Calling her Hitler. Peace, Sister Kaba. Y'all did all of that, bruh, for what? That didn't deal with none of the historiography of Nzinga's life. So what we set out to do here was not to get caught up in the he say, she say, the gossip, the assumptions, and the false narratives or play on people's emotions. We are going to continue to build on her legacy by providing historical context, accurate information, and everything that will make you look like you don't know what the hell you're talking about. So why should people should even listen to you? That's how personal I took it. So it's no longer about you. It's about me showing why people shouldn't even listen to you no more. Whether it's 30 people to hear my voice or 100 people to hear my voice or 200 people to hear my voice, I'm going to make it to where everything that you say could be questioned wholeheartedly and accurate. You disrespected this woman and you didn't even know the context in which the situation sits. So now we're on part 4. We're ending part 4 today. Part 5 will exist and emerge. Part 5 will be a great attestation to this woman's legacy. And you're going to see in each video how everything comes about. We ain't even got to the point of where you claimed she was selling all these slaves and all of this. We're just at the point to where she's ruling and she's blocking the slave routes or the slave trade routes or the slave markets. She stopped basically the enslavement of people going through these routes and things of that nature. She's pissed the Portuguese off. She ain't paying no tributes. She ain't doing none of that craziness. None. Absolutely none. Facts. First qualify all the questions. And that's the starting back at elementary. We haven't the time because everyone has to start their learning at the beginning. And that is a fact. And that's the journey that we're taking in this series. When you put things in the historical context, you remove all the assumptions and the false narrative that has been driven. And Sutek is actually correct. You're taking us backwards. You're taking us backwards because she sold slaves. Man, she blocking right now. She blocking it. She blocking it, resisting the Portuguese, fighting them, doing the best that she can. Without the arms, without all the other stuff that's going on. She doing all of that. No credit is given for that. We skip right to the part, we get right to the cherry picking part when she's trying to do something political for her kingdom to exist. But I'm not gonna hold people up, man. I appreciate everybody tuning in again. I'm not gonna draw this out. It's already we 2 hours into it. So please like the show, share the show. If you caught episode 4 but never missed, caught 1, 2, and 3, just please make sure that you actually do that. My goal, our goal as a team, as a research team, and people who study African traditions and cultures and worldview, and we know how and use a proper research methodology and put things into historical context. Our job is to give things clarity, and the more people know, the better you will learn, and then you can come to your own conclusion on your own. But we're going to give you the information based on the the related sources that are available to us. Nah, Cedric, you're absolutely correct. Nobody uses emotions about Caesar or Alexander. They don't. I just think that was just way too far. Yes, I've continued to teach on the Queen's rich. Yes, it's facts. Keep doing it too, Sister Kaba. We know you're heavily invested in making sure that all the warrior queens are mentioned in history, because that's special for our younger sisters um, that are coming up in age and looking for themselves in history, and then they can look to somebody like Queen Nzinga and understand her story and her sacrifices and all she endured, and then know that um, you know, inside of them there's a piece of her that lies in their genetic strands somewhere, possibly, or something that drives them to be as inspiring as her, and that they can see that a sister stood up, and she's not the only one. There's a number. That's why I said one of. You know what I'm saying? So it is what it is at this point. But we're going to keep on. We're going to keep on providing context, and we're going to keep on building on the legacy. And from where we are right now, we should get a good glimpse of what the mindset is of a sister that's trying to restore her kingdom back to when it was flourishing, and the presence of the Portuguese wasn't so rampant the way that it is in their presence. And I want you to think about this. This is happening in the 1600s, but this would take place again when Leopold comes into Congo. See, if you just look at the mere history from not too long ago, you had the Portuguese doing things. Remember, the Portuguese cut off the noses. Leopold cut off their hands. I'm gonna say this again. The Portuguese cut off their noses and sent them back to their lands as trophies. Leopold cut off their hands and sent it back as trophies. So the Portuguese and the Germans in the same area, years apart, do similar things. Oh man, let me get off here, man. I'm gonna just leave it at that. I want you to think about that, man. So look, I appreciate everybody for tuning in. If you missed it earlier, catch the replay. I know it's a little long, but you got an 8-hour work day, especially if you work from home and you're on your computer or doing customer service work or whatever type of work that you actually do. You could replay this video and catch up to it. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comment section. We will address them if need be, if somebody else hadn't addressed them for you. But we're trying to do those things on the behalf of everybody else. I appreciate you for tuning in. Make sure you go pick up your copy of Spiritual Combat. The link to the book is in the description. And also don't forget to pick up your copy of What SARS-CoV-2 Taught Me, because we're still fighting that as well. Support our books. We don't take donations, we write books. So help, support our works. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. Again, like the show, share the show. We love everybody. You know what I'm saying? We ain't gonna. It's only scholastically personal. Chef Sosa, it's only scholastically personal. So you got to take your whooping the way we giving it. If I pulled up on you in Baltimore, I ain't thinking nothing about Nzinga. I'm thinking about you, the person. We gonna sit down, eat, and talk, and shoot the shit. But right now, it's personal because you went too far. I'm gonna beat an apology out of you one day. You might not never apologize for your ignorance. You might not. You are social. You may not ever. You might stand on it because of your ego. It's that simple. You might. Your ego might get in the way. You might not. But if you ever apologize for it, we would deeply appreciate it.